Hello and welcome. First up, it's a fun idea if you comment your location. Thanks a lot. Remember to like and subscribe. Let's get comfy and dive in. I watch her now, standing in front of the mirror, applying her makeup like any other morning. Her movements are deliberate, practiced. Each stroke of the brush, each flick of the eyeliner, a performance she's perfected. And Sarah is beautiful. I'll give her that. But there's something different about her now. A distance, a coldness I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I did notice, but I chose to ignore it. 6 months ago, I would have kissed her goodbye, told her to have a great day at work. But today, I watch her through narrowed eyes, my face a mask of indifference. I know where she's going. I know who's waiting for her. And it's not just another day at the office. Gregory, the name alone stokes a deep, simmering fury inside me. I can almost see him standing there, smug in his wealth, his position, his entitlement. He probably thinks he's clever, that they're clever. But I'm smarter. The key to revenge is patience. You don't strike at the first opportunity. You wait, observe, bide your time. Make sure every piece is in place. When it happens, it will be swift, decisive. I'll make sure of that. The kind of revenge that doesn't leave bodies but ruins lives, quietly, methodically, with the precision of a scalpel. Ethan? Sarah's voice interrupts my thoughts. I blink, turning to face her. She's already dressed, cream blouse, pencil skirt. The professional look she knows will impress at the office, impress Gregory. I wonder if she thinks about him as she gets ready. Does she picture his hands on her while she's with me? I respond, keeping my voice calm. Distant, but not too distant. Not enough to make her suspicious. Is everything all right? She asks, her eyes scanning my face, looking for something. She can sense a shit, but she can't put her finger on it. Not yet. I smile, small, controlled. Yeah, of course, just thinking about work. A lie, but lies come easily now. They're a necessary part of the game. She gives me a smile, though there's a flicker of something behind it. Relief, maybe? Guilt? I can't tell. Or maybe it's both. She picks up her bag and walks toward me, standing on her toes to kiss me lightly on the lips. A routine gesture, meaningless now. Her lips feel cold against mine, and the scent of her perfume is almost suffocating. It used to be comforting. Now it's just another reminder of the distance between us. Don't work too hard today, she says as she heads for the door. You too, I reply. But I'm not talking about work. The door clicks shut behind her, and the silence that follows is thick, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. I stand there for a moment, staring at the door. For the first time in months, I let myself feel it, just a flicker of the rage, the betrayal, but only for a moment. Then I push it back down, lock it away where it belongs. There's no room for emotion in this, only control. I walk to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of coffee, and sit at the table, my mind already turning over the day's plans. Today is an important day. Another piece will fall into place, and she won't even see it coming. Gregory is having a meeting today, an important one. I've made sure the right people will be there. It's all set up, carefully orchestrated. A few well-placed rumors, some altered emails, and Gregory's immaculate reputation will begin to tarnish. Not enough to ruin him just yet, but enough to make him uncomfortable, enough to make her notice. And when she notices, she'll start to feel the cracks in her world. Small at first, subtle. Just enough to make her nervous, anxious. That's when she'll start making mistakes. People always do when they're on edge, when they feel like something is slipping through their fingers. That's when I'll strike. The phone on the table vibrates. I glance at the screen. Sarah's name flashes across it. A text. Running late. Don't wait up tonight. Another lie. But I smile. She thinks she's in control. She thinks she can manage both of us, balance her lies with the ease of someone who's done it before. I take a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness linger on my tongue. She doesn't know I'm already one step ahead. She doesn't know that the ground beneath her is crumbling, one piece at a time. Later tonight, over dinner, I'll drop another hint. Nothing overt, just a passing comment about how late she's been working lately. She'll laugh it off, But the seed will be planted. A small one, but enough to make her wonder. She won't know it yet, but that's how it starts. The slow unraveling of her carefully constructed life. Piece by piece, Boise's, she'll lose everything she's built, and by the time she realizes what's happening, it will be too late. For now, I wait. Patience is the key. After all, revenge is best served cold. I think back to when it started, trying to pinpoint the exact moment Sarah changed. Of course, I didn't notice it at first. No one does. It was subtle, a slow shift in behavior that anyone in love would brush off as nothing more than stress or exhaustion. But now, looking back with the clarity of hindsight, every little change stands out like a red flag I should have seen waving right in front of my face. It was about 6 months ago, a Tuesday evening. We had plans, nothing elaborate, just dinner at our favorite restaurant. She called me an hour before we were supposed to meet, her voice rushed, apologetic. I'm sorry, Ethan, I'm stuck at work. Can we do this another night? I remember the way my chest tightened, the brief sting of disappointment, but I quickly pushed it aside. Work was hectic for her at that time. End of the fiscal year, new projects. That's what I told myself. It's what she told me, and I believed it. I wanted to believe it. That night, I stayed home, made myself a simple meal, and watched some forgettable movie. I didn't think much of it then, but I recall now the vague feeling of loneliness that settled over me. I shook it off. She was ambitious, dedicated to her career. I admired that about her. I admired a lot of things about Sarah back then. The late nights started happening more often after that. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Soon she was working late 3 or 4 nights, always with the same excuses. I've got this deadline coming up, she would say. Or, we're pitching a new client. It's a big deal. I never doubted her. Why would I? Sarah was my wife, my partner, the person I trusted most in the world. If she said she was working, then that's what she was doing. But there were signs, little things that I noticed but didn't want to confront. The way she'd be glued to her phone, texting furiously and then locking the screen as soon as I walked into the room. The laughter I would hear when she thought I wasn't listening, a soft, almost intimate sound that wasn't meant for me. Her phone, which used to lie openly on the kitchen counter, was now always with her, never left unattended. I told myself not to be paranoid. Sarah was stressed, and I didn't want to add to it by questioning her every move. We were married, and trust was the foundation of that marriage. But still, there were moments when my gut told me something wasn't right. I ignored it. I pushed it down because the alternative, doubting her, suspecting her, was unthinkable. So I continued to play the role of the supportive husband, oblivious to what was really happening behind my back. Then there was Gregory. I remember the first time Sarah mentioned him. We were at a company event, one of those dull corporate mixers where spouses are dragged along to make polite small talk. Sarah had been promoted recently, and Gregory was her new boss. He's brilliant, she said, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. He's turning the whole department around. I'm learning so much from him. I didn't think much of it at the time. Gregory was just another name, another face in the crowd of people Sarah worked with. I shook his hand that night, made the usual pleasantries, and thought nothing of it. He was older than I expected, mid-40s, graying at the temples, with the kind of arrogance that came from decades of success. But he seemed harmless enough, just another powerful man in a suit. What I didn't see then, what I failed to recognize, was the way Sarah looked at him. It wasn't admiration, it was something else, something deeper, something dangerous. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment I should have known. It was a Saturday afternoon a few weeks after that company event. Sarah was in the living room, supposedly catching up on some work emails. I walked in and saw her sitting on the couch, her laptop open in front of her, but her phone was in her hand. She was smiling, her eyes fixed on the screen, typing something quickly. When she saw me, she jumped, locking her phone instantly, her expression shifting from amusement to guilt in a heartbeat. "What's so funny?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Just a stupid meme someone sent," she replied too quickly. Her face flushed, and she set the phone down, trying to act normal. But I felt it then, that cold pit of unease in my stomach. I didn't press her. I didn't want to know. As the months passed, the distance between us grew. We still talked, still went through the motions of being a married couple, but something had changed. She wasn't present anymore. Even when she was home, her mind was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. There were times when I caught myself staring at her, wondering if I was losing her, but I dismissed it. We were both busy, we both had our careers, and relationships go through phases, right? That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Sarah was slipping away from me, and I was powerless to stop it. Then came the night that should have been a wake-up call. We were supposed to have dinner together, one of the rare evenings when neither of us had work commitments. I'd made reservations at the restaurant where we had our first date, hoping to rekindle something that had been missing for too long. She was late, not just a few minutes late, an hour late. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I waited, staring at the empty seat across from me, the flickering candle casting long shadows over the table. She finally showed up, breathless, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. Gregory needed me to stay late. It was an emergency." I should have asked her more questions. I should have demanded answers. But instead, I just nodded, swallowing my frustration. "It's fine," I lied. "I get it." That night, when we got home, she went straight to bed without a word. I stayed up sitting in the dark, the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. I couldn't shake it this time. Something was wrong. I could feel it. But it wasn't until much later that I would finally let myself admit the truth. The memory that haunts me now is from a random Wednesday evening. Sarah was sitting on the couch typing away on her laptop. I was in the kitchen washing the dishes when I heard her laugh. That laugh again, soft, intimate. I glanced over and there it was, Gregory's name lighting up her phone screen. She smiled as she read his message, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she typed a reply. And that's when it hit me. The realization, cold and brutal, settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. It was Gregory. It had always been Gregory. All the late nights, the excuse, the distance. It all made sense now. I'd been a fool, blind to what was happening right in front of me. She was slipping away because she had already left. Only her body was here, but her heart, her attention, was somewhere else, with someone else. I didn't confront her that night. No, I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for what would come after. Instead, I went to bed, lying beside her as she slept, pretending everything was normal while my mind raced with the reality of what I had just uncovered. That was the night I realized something had to change. I wouldn't be the passive, blind husband anymore. I had to take control. And when I did, I would make sure that both Sarah and Gregory paid for what they had done. I would make sure they never saw it coming. Sarah continues to live her life as if nothing is wrong. She walks through the door each evening with that same smile, that same forced brightness, as if I don't know every secret she's keeping from me. I watch her closely now, each movement, each glance out of her phone. Every word she says feels rehearsed, calculated, as if she's balancing two realities in her head, one where she's still my wife and another where she's Gregory's lover. But she doesn't know that I've already begun tipping the scales. I've been meticulous. Patience is the cornerstone of my plan, and every step I've taken has been designed to be invisible to her until it's too late. It started small, a few planted seeds, barely noticeable at first. A comment here, a suggestion there. At work, I managed to get close to one of Gregory's colleagues, a man named Robert who works in the same industry but operates just beneath Gregory's radar. Robert had a bone to pick with Gregory, and I played on that. It wasn't difficult to stoke his resentment, and soon enough Robert was feeding me information that I could use. Gregory's upcoming deal with a prominent tech firm was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge. I didn't need to do much, just nudge the right pieces into place. Robert slipped a few key pieces of false data into a report, subtly undermining Gregory's position. When the deal fell apart, it wasn't catastrophic. Gregory didn't lose everything, but it was enough to damage his reputation. enough to make him seem unreliable to his superiors. And more importantly, enough to throw a wrench into his seemingly perfect life. Sarah had no idea, of course. She thought Gregory's setbacks were just a stroke of bad luck. I could see it in her eyes when she came home late that night, tired and distracted. She didn't mention Gregory, but I knew they'd been together. I could always tell when she had been with him. It wasn't just the late nights anymore. It was the way she carried herself, as though her mind was elsewhere, tethered to another man. "Rough day?" I asked casually over dinner, my voice calm, controlled. "Yeah, just a lot going on at work," she replied, stabbing her fork into the salad without really eating. "Gregory's been under a lot of pressure lately." I could see her struggling to keep the conversation light, to keep Gregory's name from dominating our dinner table. It was another subtle confirmation, another crack in her carefully constructed facade. She thought she was playing the game well, but I was the one pulling the strings. "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said, letting the words hang in the air just long enough for her to feel the weight of them. "He seems like the type who can handle pressure, doesn't he?" She froze for a split second, just a flicker of hesitation before she forced a smile. "Yeah, he's good at what he does." I nodded, pretending to drop the subject, but the seed was planted. Her expression betrayed her. The cracks were widening. Over the next few weeks, I escalated my plan. Sarah's work life became the next target. She had a delicate balance in the office. Her professionalism was her shield, and she wore it proudly. But it was a shield I could chip away at, one subtle blow at a time. Using the access I had to Robert and a few key players in her company's HR department, I started planting doubts about Sarah's competence. Anonymous complaints, falsified reports of minor errors she'd supposedly made, and strategically timed miscommunications began to paint her as unreliable. It didn't take long for the effects to show. Sarah came home more stressed, more irritable. Her late nights became less frequent, not because she wasn't seeing Gregory, but because she was spending more time at work, trying to clean up the mess that had inexplicably formed around her. The tension between her and Gregory grew, though she never said it out loud. But I could see it. The cracks between them were widening too. I began using their relationship against them, feeding Sarah subtle doubts about Gregory's loyalty, using the smallest openings to plant the idea that perhaps she wasn't as important to him as she thought. When she mentioned in passing that Gregory had been distant lately, I latched onto it. "Maybe he's got too much on his plate," I suggested one night as she poured herself a glass of wine. "With his work and everything else, it's hard to juggle all those responsibilities, you know?" She didn't respond immediately, but I saw the flicker of doubt pass through her expression. She shrugged it off, took a sip of wine, and moved on with the conversation. But the seed was there, buried deep. Doubt is a powerful thing once it takes root. While Sarah was unraveling at work and questioning her position with Gregory, I took the next step in isolating her socially. She had a small circle of close friends, people she confided in, but even those bonds could be weakened. I started leaking bits of information, small hints and whispers that painted Sarah in a less flattering light. I didn't need to reveal her affair outright. That would be too sudden, too blunt. Instead, I let rumors of her unreliability at work spread through the grapevine. It's fascinating how quickly people are willing to turn on someone when they sense vulnerability. Her friends began to keep a little more distance. Sarah noticed it but couldn't understand why. Every time she tried to confide in them, she was met with subtle coldness, the kind that chips away at a person's confidence. I watched as her frustration grew, knowing she couldn't confront it directly because she had no idea where it was coming from. As her world grew more unstable, my satisfaction grew. But I knew I wasn't finished. Gregory still hadn't faced the full brunt of what was coming, and Sarah was still blind to the extent of my influence. That was about to change. It was time to push Gregory further. Through Robert, I manipulated another deal Gregory was working on, this time ensuring that his client would lose faith in him altogether. A few well-placed phone calls, some damning financial reports that conveniently landed in the client's inbox, and Gregory's reputation took another hit. This time it wasn't just a minor setback. It was a blow that threatened to derail his career trajectory altogether. When Sarah came home that night, she was practically seething with frustration. I watched her pace around the living room, her phone clenched in her hand as she waited for a call from Gregory that never came. I knew why. Gregory was spiraling. He was trying to salvage what was left of his career, and Sarah was just another complication he didn't have time for anymore. "Everything okay?" I asked, watching her with mild interest as she sat down on the couch, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "I don't know," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "Things are complicated right now." I didn't push her. I didn't need to. Gregory was pulling away from her, just as I had intended, and she was starting to feel the isolation. The perfect man she had fallen for was losing his grip, and in turn, so was she. Over the next week, I ramped up my efforts. Over the next, Gregory's professional life was in free fall, and Sarah's world was coming apart piece by piece. She was more withdrawn, more uncertain, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't spending nearly as much time with Gregory. Their relationship was fracturing, and I knew it wouldn't be long before it shattered entirely. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable happened. Then, it did. One evening, I received a text from Robert. "Gregory's blowing up. Tomorrow's meeting is going to be a disaster." I could practically feel the tension in his message. The final piece was falling into place. The next day, Gregory's world collapsed. The deal he had been fighting to save fell through, and the client publicly severed ties, citing his unprofessionalism and lack of trustworthiness. It was the kind of public humiliation that men like Gregory don't recover from easily. He lost his footing, his allies distanced themselves, and his once stellar reputation was in tatters. I had orchestrated it perfectly, and Gregory had no idea who was behind the scenes pulling the strings. Sarah, of course, bore the brunt of his collapse. Gregory's coldness toward her became undeniable, and for the first time, I saw the panic in her eyes. Her lover was slipping away, and with him, so was the life she thought she could have. As I watched her from across the dinner table that evening, her face pale, her mind clearly somewhere else, I felt the final pieces of my plan falling into place. I was no longer just watching her world unravel. I was the one controlling the chaos, and soon she would know it. But not yet. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The day I discovered the affair was not some dramatic moment, no sudden confrontation or explosive revelation. It was subtle, almost mundane in its delivery, yet it shattered the illusion of my life so completely that the aftermath felt like stepping into a new world. A colder, darker one. It was late afternoon. Sarah had left for work hours ago, her usual goodbye kiss absent any real affection. I could still remember the softness of her lips, but it felt more like a ghost, a memory from another time. I had the day off, and without much to do, I found myself mindlessly cleaning up the house. Dishes, laundry, anything to pass the time and quiet the ever-growing sense of unease that had begun to gnaw at me over the last few months. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, an unusual slip in her otherwise careful routine. Sarah had been more protective of her phone than ever lately, keeping it within arm's reach, taking it with her to the bathroom, always locking it when she stepped away. It had become a third appendage. I stood there, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. Something inside me hesitated, that instinctual warning that told me to leave it alone. I still wanted to trust her. I still wanted to believe that whatever had changed between us could be fixed, that it wasn't what I feared it to be. But that small, nagging voice in the back of my mind, the one that had been growing louder with each passing week, pushed me forward. I picked up her phone, my heart hammering in my chest. It was locked, of course, but I knew the code. A small victory for me, though in retrospect, I wonder if Sarah had become careless, confident I wouldn't dare look. The first thing I saw was a notification, a text from Gregory. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." The blood drained from my face. My fingers tightened around the phone as I swiped open the message, my eyes scanning through the thread between them, each word burning deeper into my mind. There were no explicit confessions of love, but the meaning behind the words was painfully clear. Long conversations about work that bled into more personal territory. Jokes shared late into the night. Plans made. Private messages that spoke of stolen moments I had no knowledge of. I scrolled back, searching for the moment it began. I had to know. I had to see how far this betrayal stretched. Weeks? Months? The further I went, the worse it became. My vision blurred and I realized my hands were shaking. Gregory, the man I'd shaken hands with at that company event. The man Sarah had introduced me to with a smile, her eyes gleaming with admiration. She'd spoken about him often back then, so much so that I didn't think twice. Of course she would admire someone so successful, someone who had risen to such a high position. It was professional admiration. Or so I had convinced myself. Now I knew better. The truth hit me like a gut punch. This had been going on for longer than I wanted to admit. I stood there in the kitchen, the weight of the betrayal crushing me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, jumping between memories that now took on a darker shade. Every late night at the office, every missed dinner, every distracted look. It all made sense now. The rage hit next. I felt it surge up inside me. A blinding heat that begged for action. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, shatter it into pieces like she had shattered the trust between us. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, breathing hard through my nose as I struggled to keep my composure. No, I couldn't lose control. Not yet. Not like this. Confronting her would do nothing. She would lie, twist the truth, beg for forgiveness with those tear-filled eyes I had once loved. It would be too easy for her, too clean. And Gregory, he would walk away unscathed, continuing his perfect life as if nothing had happened. That's when it hit me. The need for revenge. Not impulsive, violent revenge. That would be satisfying for a fleeting moment, but it wouldn't give me what I needed. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I wanted Gregory to know what it was like to have everything unravel at the seams, to lose the very things he valued most. And I wanted to be the one who orchestrated it. Every step, every downfall meticulously planned, so that when they finally looked up from the wreckage of their lives, they would know it was because of me. I spent the next few hours going through every message, every detail. I wanted to know everything. When they met, how often they saw each other, where. It was like piecing together a puzzle, but instead of satisfaction, it left me with a hollow, aching void. The messages between them weren't constant, but they were regular enough. Plans made for lunch meetings that I now knew weren't just about business. Weekend work trips that lined up with the times Sarah had told me she was traveling for client consultations. I even found a few photos. Nothing explicit, but the ones of her smiling at him, taken from across a table at some dimly lit restaurant, were enough. Those were the images that seared into my mind the most. She looked genuinely happy in those moments, more so than she had around me in months. By the time Sarah got home that evening, I had already replaced her phone on the counter, my expression carefully controlled. I didn't greet her with the warmth I usually mustered. I couldn't, but I forced myself to keep my voice level when I asked her how her day was. Busy? She said with a tired smile, dropping her bag on the floor. Gregory's been stressed with this big project. It's a lot of pressure, but I think we're managing. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Managing? She didn't realize that I knew the truth, that the man she had been helping so diligently at work was more than just her boss. But I stayed silent. It took everything I had not to lash out right then, to tell her I knew. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject. If she noticed the difference in my tone, she didn't show it. That night, as she showered, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything I had learned settle into place. I wasn't devastated anymore, not really. The initial shock had worn off, leaving only a cold, calculated focus. I could destroy her. I could destroy them both, but it had to be done right. I turned onto my side and stared at the empty space beside me in the bed, imagining her there, her body still warm from the shower, her hair damp as she lay down next to me, but now that image was tainted. It wasn't her warmth I imagined anymore. It was Gregory's hands on her, his voice in her ear, his smug grin as he took what was mine. That was when I made the decision. I wouldn't confront Sarah. Not yet. Confrontation would be too direct, too explosive. She'd cry, apologize, try to justify it, and we'd go through the motions of a broken marriage, patching over the cracks only for them to resurface again later. No, that wasn't enough. I needed to watch her fall apart, piece by piece, the way she had taken me apart without even realizing it. And I needed Gregory to crumble, to lose the very things he took for granted. His career, his status, his influence, they would all fall away. I would be the one to take it from him, and Sarah would be caught in the wake of it. I didn't sleep much that night, but I felt more awake than I had in months. The next morning, I was calm. Sarah went through her routine, still oblivious to the fact that I had changed. She kissed me goodbye, the same shallow kiss she'd given me for months. I let her go, watching as she left the house thinking she was in control, but she wasn't. The power had shifted, and I was the one in control now. As I sat down with my coffee, I began planning. It wouldn't be fast. It couldn't be. This needed to be thorough, methodical. Every step had to be calculated so that by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be too late. I would destroy them both, but it would be slow, deliberate, a dismantling of everything they held dear, starting with their careers, their reputations, their carefully curated lives. They wouldn't see it coming, not until the very end, when all the pieces finally fell into place. Sarah is unraveling. I can see it in the way she carries herself, shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously around the room, her expression tight and anxious. She's caught in a web, and I'm the one tightening it around her. Every day, the pressure builds, and she has no idea why. The subtle manipulations I put in place are working perfectly, and the beauty of it is that I don't have to do anything more. The damage is already in motion. It starts with her at work. The anonymous complaints I filed with HR have sown doubt in her department. Her colleagues whisper behind her back now, questioning whether she's as competent as they once believed. I made sure the accusations weren't anything too obvious. Nothing that would draw immediate attention, just enough to create suspicion. A missed deadline here, a poorly communicated project detail there. Things that could easily be mistakes, but when compounded, begin to paint a picture of someone who's losing control. Sarah confides in me, though she doesn't realize she's speaking to the very person who set her downfall in motion. "Work's been rough," she says one evening as we sit in the living room. Her voice is strained and she keeps glancing at her phone, likely waiting for a message from Gregory that won't come. "Why?" I ask, feigning concern, knowing full well the chaos she's dealing with. "I don't know," she sighs, sinking into the couch beside me. "There have been issues, complaints about my performance. It's ridiculous. I've done everything by the book, but it's like things keep going wrong." I nod sympathetically, watching as the lines of frustration deepen on her face. "I'm sure it'll blow over," I say, my voice steady. Inside, though, I'm smiling. This is exactly what I wanted, to make her feel powerless, to make her question her own competence, just as she made me question everything when I discovered the affair. But work isn't the only place where the tension is building. Her relationship with Gregory is starting to crack as well, though she's desperately trying to keep it together. I've made sure Gregory's career takes its own hits, making him more distant, more focused on salvaging his own reputation than nurturing his secret relationship with Sarah. It's perfect. They're both under immense pressure, and it's driving them apart. One night, I watch as Sarah paces the kitchen, her phone in hand. She keeps glancing at it, expecting a call or a text that never comes. It's Gregory, of course. He's not answering her anymore, too consumed with the fallout from the deal I sabotaged weeks ago. "Is everything okay?" I ask from my seat at the dining table, keeping my tone neutral, careful not to reveal the satisfaction simmering just beneath the surface. "Yeah," she mutters, clearly distracted. "Just work stuff." Gregory's been distant lately. "Maybe he's dealing with his own issues," I suggest, letting the words hang in the air. She looks at me, her brow furrowed, but she says nothing. I can see the doubt creeping in, that seed I planted weeks ago starting to grow. Maybe Gregory isn't as reliable as she thought. Maybe he's pulling away. As Sarah spirals, I continue tightening the web around her. I plant small hints within her social circles, careful not to overplay my hand. Her friends, the ones she's relied on for years, start to grow distant, sensing something is off. They don't trust her like they used to, and why should they? I've made sure they're hearing things, small, seemingly harmless pieces of gossip about Sarah's unreliability, about how her work has suffered lately, about how she's been acting strangely. It's subtle, but it works. The cracks in her personal life are forming, just as they did at work. The real blow comes when I orchestrate a situation where Sarah is caught in a compromising position with Gregory. It's not difficult, really. I've been watching their routine for months, learning their habits, understanding how they operate. I know when they meet and where, and with a few careful manipulations, I ensure that they're seen together by the right people. A mutual acquaintance, someone from her office who's been privy to the rumors I've been spreading, happens to catch them at a restaurant one evening. The news spreads like wildfire, and soon enough, everyone knows. The whispers grow louder, and Sarah's reputation begins to crumble, both at work and in her social circle. She comes home that night, her face pale, her hands shaking. She doesn't say anything, but I know. I can see it in her eyes. The realization that everything is slipping through her fingers is starting to set in. She doesn't know what's happening, but she can feel it. The control she once had, the careful balance she maintained between her life with me and her affair with Gregory, is gone. "What's wrong?" I ask, watching her closely as she drops her purse on the floor and sits down heavily on the couch. "People, they're talking," she says, her voice hollow. "At work, I mean. There are rumors." "Rumors?" I repeat, pretending to be surprised. She nods, running a hand through her hair. "Someone saw me with Gregory. They think we're—" She trails off, but I don't need her to finish the sentence. I know exactly what they think because I made sure they would think it. "Maybe it's time to take a step back," I suggest, my voice calm and measured. "Maybe focus on us for a while." Sarah looks at me, her eyes wide with something that resembles panic. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you've been putting too much energy into work, into everything else. Maybe it's time to focus on your personal life." She stares at me for a moment, as if trying to understand what I'm really saying, but she's too frazzled, too caught up in the chaos I've created to fully process it. She nods weakly, though I can see the doubt creeping in. She knows something is wrong, but she still hasn't figured out that I'm the one pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Gregory is facing his own crisis. The professional setback I orchestrated has thrown his career into turmoil. His reputation is in tatters, and he's scrambling to salvage what's left. The clients who once trusted him have turned away, and his position in the company is hanging by a thread. He doesn't have time for Sarah anymore, not with everything else falling apart around him. The distance between them grows, and I watch as Sarah becomes more and more isolated. She tries to reach out to him, but Gregory's responses are curt, dismissive. He's too busy trying to save himself, and Sarah is becoming more of a liability than anything else. One evening, I'm sitting in the living room when I hear Sarah's voice from the kitchen. She's on the phone talking quietly, but I can tell she's trying to hold back tears. "Gregory, I don't understand what's happening," she says, her voice trembling. "You've been so distant, and now people are talking. I don't know what to do." There's a long pause, and I can only imagine what Gregory is saying on the other end of the line. Whatever it is, it's not what Sarah wants to hear. I hear her sniffle, and when she speaks again, her voice is barely a whisper. Are you saying it's over?" Another pause, then quietly, "Okay." She hangs up the phone, and for a long moment, the only sound in the house is the ticking of the clock on the wall. I don't move. I don't say anything. I just wait. Sarah finally walks into the living room, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She sits down across from me, and for the first time in months, I see something close to defeat in her expression. "It's over," she says quietly, her voice hollow. "With Gregory?" I ask, my tone carefully neutral. She nods, staring at the floor. He said it's too complicated. He said, he said he needs to focus on his career. I nod slowly as if processing the information, though inside I'm already thinking about the next step. I'm not done yet. Sarah's life may be falling apart, but there's still more to unravel. In the weeks that follow, things only get worse for her. The rumors at work continue to spread, and despite her best efforts, Sarah can't regain her footing. Her colleagues distance themselves, and Gregory's absence leaves her vulnerable. She tries to keep up appearances, but it's clear she's struggling. One night, I make sure Sarah is home alone when Gregory's final professional downfall is made public. The company he worked so hard to build announces they're letting him go, citing the very same failures I orchestrated. It's all over the news, a public humiliation that will follow him for the rest of his career. Gregory's name is synonymous with failure now, and Sarah is left to pick up the pieces of her own shattered life, knowing that the man she sacrificed everything for has abandoned her. It's then that I know the time is right. I've watched her fall apart, piece by piece, and now it's time for the final blow. I make the call to Gregory's replacement at the company, offering up the last bit of information that will ensure Sarah's complete isolation at work. It's done. That night, Sarah sits across from me at the dinner table, her face pale, her eyes distant. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. I've already won. But I'm not done yet. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact moment I knew Sarah was lying. Perhaps it was when she came home that night, smiling as though nothing was wrong, her eyes slightly glassy from a long day at work, or so she claimed. Maybe it was the shift in her tone, more detached, more guarded, as if every word she said was carefully constructed to avoid an accidental confession. But deep down, I think I always knew. Looking back, I can recall those little signs that I ignored, not wanting to believe they could mean anything significant. The text messages she would hurriedly hide, the sudden nights spent at the office, the missed calls from a number she insisted was a colleague. I convinced myself they were nothing. I wanted to believe they were nothing. That's what love does. It blinds you, makes you a fool. I remember one night in particular. We were lying in bed, the house quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the air conditioner. Sarah was next to me, her body turned away, her breathing deep and slow, but I knew she wasn't asleep. I couldn't sleep either. I had been staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. There had been another late night at work, another excuse that didn't sit right, but I had said nothing. "Ethan?" she had whispered, her voice barely audible in the darkness. "Yeah," I replied, turning to face her, though she didn't turn back to me. "Do you ever feel like we're just drifting apart?" Her words struck me, not just because of their content, but because of the way she said them, tentative, as if she was testing the waters. I didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. I wanted to tell her that, yes, I had noticed it too, that something between us had changed, but I didn't. Instead, I reached out and touched her arm, as if that simple act could somehow bridge the growing chasm between us. "Of course not," I lied. "We've just been busy." She didn't reply, and the silence that followed felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. After a few minutes, she shifted in bed, turning her back to me again, and I lay there staring into the darkness, feeling more alone than ever. It wasn't long after that night that I discovered the truth. I don't know what compelled me to check her phone, some instinct, some quiet voice in the back of my mind that refused to be silenced any longer. She had left it unlocked on the kitchen counter while she showered, an unusual slip in her otherwise careful routine. I picked it up, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that I wouldn't find anything. But there it was, the message thread with Gregory. At first, I didn't believe what I was reading. I scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger in my heart. They weren't overly explicit, but the meaning behind them was clear. Inside jokes, plans for secret lunches, compliments that went beyond professional. Gregory. The man she had introduced me to at her office party, the man I had shaken hands with, not knowing he was the one dismantling my marriage behind my back. I remember setting the phone down, my hands trembling, my mind reeling. The anger came next, sharp and consuming. But beneath it was something else, something colder. The realization that Sarah had been looking me in the eye, lying to me every day, and I had let her. I had been complicit in my own betrayal. That was the moment everything changed. I could no longer be the man who simply accepted things at face value. I wouldn't confront her. No, that would be too easy for her. Instead, I would make sure she felt the same slow, creeping despair that had overtaken me. But unlike her, I would control it. I would orchestrate her downfall so meticulously that by the time she realized what was happening, it would be far too late. It wasn't hard to maintain my facade. I had become practiced at pretending everything was fine, at smiling through the resentment building inside me. Sarah had no idea that I knew. She carried on with her life, oblivious to the fact that I had already begun plotting her undoing. Every time she kissed me goodbye, every time she told me she loved me, it only steeled my resolve further. I think the hardest part was pretending to still care. The small, intimate moments we shared felt hollow, devoid of the love they once carried. But I played my part well. I had to. For my plan to succeed, Sarah couldn't suspect a thing. One night, months after I discovered the affair, we were sitting in the living room, watching some mindless television show. I wasn't paying attention to the screen. My mind was elsewhere, thinking about the pieces I had already set in motion. Sarah had no idea that her work life was beginning to unravel, that I had planted seeds of doubt among her colleagues, carefully orchestrating small failures that would eventually snowball into something much larger. I could see it in the way she carried herself, tense, distracted. She hadn't mentioned Gregory in a while, and I knew it was because their relationship was fraying. My plan was working. That night she turned to me, her eyes tired, and asked, "Do you still love me?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Of course," I said, the lie slipping easily from my lips. It was what she needed to hear, what she wanted to believe. But the truth was, I didn't love her anymore. I couldn't. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. Someone who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. The night I finally confronted her in my mind, the night I truly understood the depth of her betrayal, was a memory that stood out starkly. It wasn't just one of her typical lies, but one that broke through any lingering doubt I might have had about her character. We had been sitting at dinner, the tension between us palpable, though Sarah had been attempting to keep up the facade of normalcy. I asked her about a trip she was supposed to take the next weekend. She had mentioned it weeks ago, a work retreat or something. I already knew it wasn't happening. Gregory had canceled it, having other things to deal with thanks to the chaos I had helped create in his professional life. But I wanted to hear her lie. I wanted her to look me in the eye and tell me that she was going away for work when I knew she was planning to see Gregory. "Oh yeah," she said casually, cutting into her meal. "It's still on, just a short trip. I'll be back by Sunday." That was the moment. When she looked me in the eye, that glimmer of deceit flickering behind her words, that's when I knew. There was no going back. Whatever remained of our marriage was gone, and in its place was only this, the lies, the betrayal, the quiet destruction of everything we had built together. I nodded, playing my part, but inside something cold and sharp had settled. The final pieces of my plan clicked into place. Sarah thought she was still in control, that she could balance her life between Gregory and me without consequence. She was wrong. I thought back to all the moments she had lied to me, all the times she had smiled and told me everything was fine. It was those memories that fueled me. It wasn't just about punishing her anymore. It was about reclaiming the power she had taken from me. Every time she lied, she chipped away at the man I had been, turning me into someone I barely recognized. But now I had taken back that power, and soon Sarah would feel the full weight of what she had done. When she finally looked up at me that night, her smile fading as she sensed something was off, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. For her, the final move was about precision. Every step until now had led me to this point, and as I sat across from Sarah at the dinner table that night, I knew it was time to bring everything crashing down. She was barely eating, pushing her food around on the plate, her mind elsewhere. The tension between us had become palpable over the past few weeks, but I had kept up my facade, acting concerned when necessary, feigning ignorance to her spiraling life. I knew exactly where she was emotionally, confused, desperate, and completely unaware that the man she thought she could still deceive was the one dismantling her world. "You seem distant," I said casually, taking a sip of my wine. It was an opening, a nudge toward the inevitable confrontation I had orchestrated. I could see the fear in her eyes, a flicker of something she had been trying to suppress. "I'm just tired," she replied, her voice shaky. "Work has been difficult." I nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine." She glanced up at me, her gaze searching. "But for what?" Said I didn't know. Some sign of the man I used to be? The forgiving, oblivious husband? That man was long gone. We ate in silence for a few more minutes before she put down her fork and leaned back in her chair. "I need to tell you something." Here it was, the moment I had been waiting for. The confession. The guilt finally clawing its way out after weeks of watching her life crumble. I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. "What is it?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands as if searching for the right words. I, I've made mistakes. Big ones." I let the silence stretch, the weight of her admission hanging in the air between us. She was giving me an opening, but I wanted her to say it. I wanted her to finally confess everything. "I know about Gregory," I said, my voice soft but firm. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide in shock. "What?" "I've known for a long time, Sarah," I continued, my gaze never leaving hers. "I know about the affair. I know about all of it." For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Her mouth opened, her hands clenched into fists on the table. But then slowly the fight drained out of her. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. How how long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to watch everything you built with him fall apart." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no remorse. This was the moment I had been working toward, and her tears were meaningless to me now. She had no idea what I had done, how meticulously I had orchestrated her downfall. But she would soon. I thought, her voice cracked, "I thought we could fix this. That we could still—" I shook my head, cutting her off. "There's nothing left to fix, Sarah. You destroyed it." She began to cry in earnest now, her body shaking as she covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I ruined everything." I let her cry, let her wallow in the guilt she had tried to bury for so long. But I wasn't done. I still had one last move to make. "You didn't just ruin our marriage," I said, my voice growing colder. "You ruined everything. Your life, your career, your reputation. All of it is gone." She looked up at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, leaning forward, "that I made sure everyone knew about you and Gregory. I made sure your colleagues doubted you, that they saw you for what you really are. I made sure your so-called friends turned their backs on you. Everything that's gone wrong these past few months, that was me." The color drained from her face as my words sank in. "You did this?" "I told you, Sarah, I've known for a long time. And I wasn't just going to let you get away with it." Her lips trembled, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Why? Why would you—" "Because you betrayed me," I said, my voice a low hiss. "You lied to me over and over again. You thought you could just move on with Gregory, keep me in the dark, and live your life without consequences. But you were wrong." She stared at me, stunned, unable to process the truth. "Ethan, please." "No," I interrupted, standing up from the table. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness now. It's too late for that." I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her life was completely and irrevocably ruined. The man she had trusted to be passive, to forgive, was the one who had orchestrated her downfall from the very beginning. Gregory won't help you, I said, watching her face as her tears dried up in shock. He's ruined too. His career is over. No one will touch him now, not after what I did to his business deals. He's a liability, and he knows it. Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked broken, a shell of the woman she had once been, the confidence and control she thought she had evaporating in an instant. I felt no satisfaction, only a cold, hollow emptiness. You'll never recover from this, I said, turning away from her. Your career, your relationships, your life, it's all over. She sobbed behind me, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I had destroyed her, and in doing so, I had destroyed a part of myself too. As I walked out of the house that night, I knew I had won. But as the cold night air hit my face, I wondered if the victory had been worth it.